You all. And joining us now is Lee Gelernt. He's deputy director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project. Lee successfully argued for this injunction, which was to halt any further deportation flights. For now, at least. And Lee, thank you for joining us. I know you are literally on your way to Washington as we speak for this emergency hearing later this afternoon. So we've got you on the phone, but I just got to get your top questions that you are hoping to get answered at today's hearing.
Yeah, and I apologize, but I need to get on this flight for this emergency hearing. We raised several questions in a filing last night at 2:15 a.m. about whether any flights left after the court's order, whether any flights landed after the court's order, and then whether anybody was handed over to the Salvadoran government after the court's order. If any of that happened, it's a violation of the court's order and a very, very serious matter. The fact that they might have been in international territory makes no difference because the U.S. had custody of these individuals and the judge specifically ordered them to be returned. If we're going to hear answers from the government, but if any of that happened, we are one step closer to a sort of constitutional crisis with the government flatly defying court orders. And I would just say on the larger picture of whether the Alien Enemies Act is being used properly, absolutely not. Congress could not have been clearer in the statute that it has to be a foreign government or nation invading or in a declared war with the U.S. Fundamentally, this is about separation of powers and the Trump administration thumbing their nose at Congress and the courts. I apologize. I got to get on this flight for the hearing. I'm sorry.
So Lee, if you have just a quick second, though, how do you... Okay, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, Lee. We'll hope to catch you on the other side of this hearing as this story continues to develop. Let me bring back our Joyce Vance to talk a little bit more about just some of the legal issues at stake here. We know not only did the administration, Joyce, argue that these flights were out of U.S. territory, therefore it was okay, but we also heard from the White House press secretary making the argument that a single judge in a single U.S. city cannot direct the movements of a plane that have on board what she called terrorists who are being expelled from U.S. soil. How do you look at that argument?
Right. So this is the larger argument that the government is advancing, perhaps not as much in court or in practice as they are for public consumption. And it's the argument that the president has broad powers under Article 2 of the Constitution, and that if he decides to make these designations and do this, he has the ability to do that regardless of what the law says or what Congress requires. You know, that's this very dangerous argument, part of the trend that we've been seeing by the president to consolidate all of the power of government in his hands and upset the balance of power between the three branches of government.
And Julia, there's this whole third country piece of the story, right? Because these Venezuelan migrants, who, again, are reportedly part of this gang, weren't deported back to Venezuela. They were taken to El Salvador. That's where we've been showing the video from. That was released by officials there in El Salvador saying they're here, we welcome them, and they're being held there for the U.S. The U.S. is paying the El Salvadorian officials to hold them. Is this something that has precedent?
It does have precedent, but of course not under the Alien Enemies Act. It's actually something that Trump tried in his first administration, and he's been doing it with some regularity in this administration, mainly taking people from other countries back to the countries of Panama and Honduras. We also know he has a similar agreement with Guatemala, but we have yet to see nationals who are not from Guatemala be deported to that country yet, although that could happen any day. As far as El Salvador, this all goes back to an agreement between the president of El Salvador and Marco Rubio when he visited the country very early on in this administration. And the president said that he welcomed anyone from the United States, whether they be immigrants or Americans convicted of crimes here, to come and stay in these supermax prisons. Those images you see, that's that huge prison that the president of El Salvador has built. We understand multiple men can share those beds. They're concrete slabs without so much as a mattress or a sheet. Very extreme conditions there. And to think that people are now being sent there without due process, Anna, that part is definitely unprecedented. And it really changes the calculation of what this administration is willing to do to show how far it will go on deportations. One other thing I want to point out is that in the past, for many administrations, it's been hard to deport any Venezuelans back to Venezuela. It was something that really hampered the Biden administration because there were so many Venezuelans coming into the country and there was nowhere to send them back to. But recently, Trump has had an agreement with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to send some Venezuelans back. And in fact, he has done so. So it begs the question, why were these men sent to El Salvador and not to Venezuela?
Okay, Julia Ainsley, Joyce Vance, thank you both. We'll wait to see if we get more answers and a clearer direction of where this is all headed after today's emergency hearing. Appreciate you, ladies.